This podcast is brought to you by Free Buddhist Audio, the Dharma for your life. Our work is funded entirely by donations from our generous listeners. If you would like to help us keep this free, make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. Thank you, and happy listening.
Once upon a time, there were two young playmates, a little boy, Kai, and a little girl, Gerda. And they lived in two houses opposite each other that were so near the balconies almost touched each other. So they could hop across from one balcony to the other. And they played all day long. At the same time, there was a wicked wizard. And the wicked wizard made this wicked mirror. And in this mirror, everything that was beautiful looked ugly. It was like one of those fairground mirrors, but even more sinister. Everything that was beautiful looked ugly in this mirror. All good deeds looked like ugly deeds. All beautiful things just looked horrible. And the wicked wizard and all his goblins thought this was marvellous, and they were flying over the land, and everything was being reflected in the mirror, and they thought it was very, very funny. And they were laughing so hard they dropped the mirror, and it shattered into a million pieces. Meanwhile, Kai and Gerda are still playing, but suddenly Kai went, "Oh!" Something had gone into his heart. And something had gone into his eye. And suddenly he looked at all the roses, the beautiful roses, and he said, "Oh, these are so ugly," and he started throwing them over the balcony. And Gerda was so shocked. She didn't know what to say. She was saying, "Stop, stop," but he was just throwing everything off the balcony. And of course he had a sliver of the mirror right in his heart and right in his eye. And he didn't want to play with Gerda anymore, and she didn't know what had happened because they'd gone in so quickly they were invisible. And then that went on all summer. They didn't play anymore, and then winter came, and then in the winter there was a huge flurry of snow, and there was snow blowing and blowing and blowing, and then the snowflakes took form, and it was the Snow Queen, and she had come for little Kai, and she took little Kai and she wrapped him in her big white fur coat. And then she kissed him on the forehead, and she touched his heart. And when she did that, his heart froze into a block of ice, and she took him away. And then little Gerda was distraught. She had lost her little friend. Kai, when the ice froze over his heart, he forgot all about Gerda, and he forgot all about his life back home. He only wanted to go with the Snow Queen. But she didn't forget him. Gerda didn't forget him. She started to search for him, and she searched and searched through all the land, and she had lots of adventures on this search, and even distractions. She met an old woman with a beautiful and enchanted garden, and she was so enchanted by the flowers and their wonderful smell, she nearly forgot about her search for little Kai. She was nearly entranced by the woman. Suddenly she remembered, "Oh no, I know what I've got to do. I've got to find him." And then she met the robber maiden, and they had great fun together, she and the robber maiden. And they were having such fun, she nearly forgot about her search, but she just remembered in time. And she searched and searched and searched, and then one day she came to the land of ice and snow, and there was little Kai. and he was playing with these blocks of ice. And he seemed to be playing with them and moving them around and around, and he was getting more and more. She could see he was just getting really distressed, and every way he moved them, it wasn't right. And he was trying to spell the word eternity. That was the task he'd been given by the Snow Queen. And only then would he be free, if he could make these blocks of ice into the word eternity. And he just couldn't do it. Every time he was trying to do it, it was a bit like a Rubik's Cube or something. Every time he was trying to do it, it wouldn't work. And there he was. But then here came little Gerda, and she was overjoyed to see him. He didn't even recognise her because he'd forgotten all about her. But she was overjoyed to see him. And her tears of joy just poured over him. She hugged him, and they fell on his heart. And they melted the ice in his heart, and they washed away the splinter, the mirror in his heart. And then suddenly he remembered her, and he started to cry with joy, these warm tears of joy, and then they washed away the splinter of glass in his eye. And suddenly he remembered everything, and he remembered he loved little Gerda, and they were so happy. And then the blocks of ice themselves got caught up in this happiness, and even the blocks of ice started to dance for joy, and they danced for joy, and when they came back down again, they spelled the word eternity. And then they were free, and they could escape from the Snow Queen. So the wisdom of the Buddhas is not cold and detached. The Buddha sees everything as beautiful because they see everything with metta. Just as when we're full of ill will and hatred, we see everything as ugly. And the Buddha as well talked about a splinter in the heart. A thorn in the heart, the Buddha called it. When the Buddha became enlightened, what he uttered was, "There is a thorn buried in the heart of man. I have found this thorn and pulled it out." So that's what the Buddha did. So that's what we're up against. We've got this thorn, unenlightened, we've got this thorn in our heart, and it's buried so deeply we can't see it, and we don't even know it's there because it's all like covered over. It's all covered over, so it's just there in our heart, but we can't even see it. So, but the Buddha managed to not only see it, but pull it out. So, yeah, I wanted to start with this because this is what we're up against in our Dharma life. We've got to find this thorn. That's hard enough, and then we've got to pull it out. Maybe finding it's the hardest bit because we don't know it's there. It's always been there. It's always been there. It's inborn, but it's not so much that we're born with it from a Buddhist point of view. It's we're born or reborn because of it. Unless we happen to be a great bodhisattva who's been reborn to save all beings. So if anyone is that, that's good. That means you've not got a thorn in your heart. But if you're not, then we've got this thorn in our heart. I was thinking actually it's like a fish hook. with and like with two great barbs, and one of the barbs is greed and hatred, but the other, even deeper barb is delusion, ignorance, avidya, and they're right there in our heart, and we can't even see them. And that's our great task. That's what made the Buddha. So we know it can be done, but how are we going to do it? The Buddha managed to see this thorn, this fish hook, and pull it out. So it can be done, and when it's not our fault that we've got this fish hook in our heart. I think that's very, very important to know that this isn't a moral issue, this fish hook, thorn, splinter of glass in our heart. But we can only be free once it's out. We can only be free once it's out, and that can happen. A more sort of contemporary image is I sometimes, or quite often think, it's like splitting the atom. So an atom's got I was going to say 3 parts, but actually it's got lots, as when they discovered, it's the nuclear particles. But let's, for the sake of argument, just say it's got 3. It's got the nucleus of the atom, that's got the proton and the neutron, then it's got all the electrons flying around. So I already knew about electrons for ages, but the centre of that atom, the proton and the neutron, no one knew you could split the atom until they discovered that you could. No one knew you could. And when you could, when that was discovered, that's when that strong nuclear force that binds them was discovered and released. There was like an almost infinite amount of energy. Of course, that can be used for good or ill, but an infinite amount of energy, a chain reaction of energy that no one even had dreamed was possible. So sometimes I think it's a bit like that. Before the Buddha was free, it was a bit like us as human beings, and greed, hatred and delusion were just this one thing, like bound up, like no one knew what it was like to have a human life that didn't have greed, hatred and delusion at the heart of it. The Buddha discovered they don't have to go together. You can free the heart of greed, hatred and delusion, and when that happens, this tremendous force is released, which is only the force of compassion, and you won't be free until that happens, yeah? So again, that's another image of just to show what the Buddha was up against, what we're all up against, but what the Buddha managed to do. When I was thinking, it's funny, I made some notes for this talk, and then I looked back at them and I thought, what was I talking about? And what I'd written down was, I'd written, ordination training is no ordination training. I thought, what did I mean by that? And then I thought, oh yeah, I know what I meant by that. I meant ordination training isn't ordination training. Like everything we're trying to do here at Tirata-loka in our Dharma life, actually, it's about trying to be free, yeah? And effective going for refuge means committing to try and be free, vowing to try and be free and lead all beings with us. So the $1 million question, the $10 million question, is how are we going to do that? We can't even see this thorn. So how are we going to do that? We can see the effects of it, but we can't see it. It's so sort of sealed up in our heart. So the image for how we're going to do it, I was going to draw this, but I thought your imaginations are probably better than my drawing. So the image I like to use is that of a hot air balloon, okay? So imagine a balloon. So imagine the basket of the balloon. The balloon's on the ground, okay, in your imagination just now. the balloon's sitting there on the ground, we're all in it, kind of ready to go flying. The balloon is tethered to the ground by ropes or even chains. It's also full of sandbags to weigh it down, and it's also, the balloon itself is all just, like one of those party balloons when all the air's gone out. It's all just flopping around, yeah. So how are we going to get the balloon off the ground flying? So we've got to work on we've got to do three things. So we've got to loosen, or actually in the end cut. We've got to get untethered these ropes, yeah? So that is, these ropes, these 10 ropes correspond to the 10 fetters that bind us to the earth, yeah? So that's all our wisdom practices, all our reflections on, well, especially those first 3 fetters. Loosen these fetters, yeah? And I was thinking in terms of Tiratana, that's the approach we take on retreats such as the Transcendental Principle Retreat. Yeah, we're really working on loosening these fetters. We're seeing that fixed self-view and so on. We're reflecting on the lakshanas. We're, loosening these fetters, these chains. And then the basket's full of sandbags. So we've got to get, these are the sandbags of these are the sandbags of our conscience, yeah? So we've got to lighten our load by flinging out these sandbags, yeah? And that's our whole approach of karma. That's our whole approach of becoming more and more ethically pure. We're becoming lighter and lighter. You can feel that, can't you, when you practice confession and so on? We're becoming lighter and lighter. So, in Tiratana terms, that particularly, not one that corresponds to our ethics to insight retreat. We throw out these sandbags. But even if you've cut all the ropes, even if you've thrown every single sandbag, has the balloon left the ground? Mm-hmm. No, because we have to light the fire of love and devotion. Yeah, we have to light that fire, and that's what we're doing here. Yeah, that's what we're doing on this retreat. We're lighting the fire. Vanda Jyoti said it last night. We want our imagination to be on fire. We're lighting the fires of imagination. So, of course, we need all these approaches. If we had the fire lit, we didn't have the ropes cut, it'd be harder work for the fire. I don't know whether to say it or not, but anyway, I think the fires are most important, as you might gather. So the fires, they're all important, but that fire is the fire that's going to lift us off the ground. And what is the ground? The ground is me in the middle of it all, yeah? Me in the middle of it all. So we're trying to lift the balloon, we're trying to free the balloon of ourselves away from that egoistic, what's in it for me, yeah? What's in it for me, what do people think about me, thing, which, while we're kind of this side of enlightenment, or at least this side of stream entry, we'll always fall back on that. Sometimes we can get quite a long way away from that, especially on a retreat like this when we're really, appreciating beauty and so on. But sooner or later, it all comes back to what's in it for me, yeah? Often sooner, in my case. You can think you're having this wonderful, refined experience, and then suddenly, I don't know, somebody's moved your cushion or something, or talked in the silence or something, do you know what I mean? Then it's like boing, like back to what's in it for me. So when these fires are lit, the balloon rises up, and then we realise, hopefully we've realised all along, that this balloon isn't just free-floating, it's actually been drawn towards the sun, and actually it's turned into a space rocket that's been drawn, that's gradually leaving the gravitational field of me in the middle of it all, and has been pulled towards the sun of enlightenment. Yeah, it's been pulled towards the sun of enlightenment. More and more, that field of influence is exerting more and more of a pull. So two things are happening at the same time. We're getting free of me in the middle of it all, but also it's as if what we're moving towards is drawing us towards it. Well, it is. It's not as if. It is. The sun of enlightenment is drawing this balloon space rocket towards it. So there are three approaches, and as I say, what we're doing on this retreat is we're particularly, it's not the other ones won't be operational, of course, but we're particularly taking this approach of beauty, of devotion. We're trying to open our eyes. We're trying to see with more than the eye, the fleshy eye. Yeah, we're trying to see with more than the fleshy eye. We're trying to open the eye of imagination, which allows us to see beauty. Yeah? That's the only thing that allows us to see beauty. In a certain sense, we can't really see beauty unless that's open. Yvonne and I had a lovely walk the day before the retreat started, and we were talking about how if we're, that feeling when you're so absorbed in your to-do list, what have I got to do next? You're walking along and your eye's telling you that's beautiful, but you can't actually feel it. Do you know that? So that's what I mean when I say, actually, we need imagination. It's not really just our literal eyes that see beauty. Unless the eye of imagination is open, we won't see the beautiful as beautiful. A lovely example of this that I often like to tell about, I saw quite a long time ago now, a little film, and it was made by was it the British Museum in London or the V&A? Maybe the British Museum in London. And one of their prize pieces, out of all the pieces, they had 10 prize pieces, and one of them is a standing image of Tara. And so they'd made a little film about this as one of their prize pieces, and they had all different people talking about the figure. And the two that stood out to me were Professor Gombrich and Anthony Gormley. So Gombrich is a professor of Buddhist studies, I think, and he was looking at this figure of Tara, and he was telling all about it. He was telling all the sort of pedigree, as it were, where it would come from, who Tara is, da-da-da. And you were listening to him, you think, oh yeah, that's good, it sounds right, it doesn't sound wrong, But there it was. It didn't set the imagination on fire particularly, but he said that. And then Anthony Gormley came, the artist and sculptor, and he looked at the statue and he said, when you see a statue like that, that's been reverenced and worshipped through centuries, can't you see the aura around it? So he, Anthony Gormley, the artist, saw the aura around the Buddha of all the worship over centuries. The professor, gave a good account, but it was the artist who saw, whose eye of imagination was open and could see the aura. So the most important thing to say, and Vajratara has already said this, and Vandana Jyoti, but I'm going to say it again because we've got to say it like 100 times, 1,000 times, is this is something that we can cultivate. This isn't a question of type, This isn't a question of, I'm not the imaginative type, It's not that at all. I'm not the devotional type. It's not that at all. It's not a matter of type. It's something that we can cultivate. It's something we can mature, as Vandana Jyoti said last night. I thought that was beautiful. And the English poet Coleridge has talked about this very explicitly, talked about imagination as a faculty. So given that it is a faculty, it's something that we can sort of practice, actually, just like we would practice anything. And I just feel that I owe so much in this to one of the talks in Subhuti's series that's the reading for this retreat, which is Subhuti's talk. Well, it's a talk on receptivity, but the first thing he does is he retranslates that as dharmic responsiveness. So hopefully you've had a chance to read this talk before the retreat, but honestly, if you haven't, I just feel like, well, to me this was a revelation, this talk. I just thought it was absolutely wonderful, this dharmic responsiveness. And again, what Subhuti, this is wholly for him what I'm going to say now, what Subhuti is really encouraging us, well, first of all, he's saying that capacity to respond to truth, beauty and goodness is innate in us as human beings. It's part of being human. We must have it if we're human. We've all got it. But also it might be more or less covered up. And maybe you could even think about that in your groups. What covers it up? What obscures it? It can be blunted, for example, by cynicism and even bitterness, in ourselves and in the society we live in. It can be blunted and covered up. It can be, be made flabby by the wrong diet. I notice that in myself, If I spend too much time on social media, or even if I read the sort of wrong sort of books, the sort of more page-turnery sort of things. I'm not trying to say that's morally bad, but I notice that directly affects my ability to appreciate poetry. It's like I make myself unfit or something to be able to then read the thing that's really going to nourish me and mature my imagination. So it can be blunted or covered up. At the same time, it can be sharpened, it can be drawn out, it can be educated. Like our wonderful evening last night, with somebody who can help us to, this is how to listen to music, I love that. I used to be so scared of art galleries because I thought, oh my God, I'm supposed to have a response and I don't know how to look at it. And then I started going to art galleries with my boyfriend Satyaraja, who is an artist himself, and I just started asking him, why do you love that paint? I mean, he would say, look, do you see how it looks like it's got a light source that isn't coming from anywhere? And I'd be like, oh yeah, it does. Like, do you see how the painters painted so your eye's drawn here? And I'd be like, oh yeah, I can see it too. And then I gradually started to just learn that, and then of course a whole world opens up. A whole world opens up. So it's a faculty we can cultivate, and but the even more important thing, everything's important. The even more important thing. No, this is the most important thing. Everything's just more important. The even more important thing that Subhuti says is we have to start where we respond. Yeah, we have to start where we respond. These two things go together. Our imagination can be matured and cultivated. So it's not that we stop where we are, but we start where we are. That's it. That's a little aphorism, maybe. Don't stop where we are, but start where we are. So both are true at the same time. In other words, we need to see what we respond to, Not an idea of what we should respond to, but what we actually respond to. Otherwise, if you remember, Subhuti says we end up building our life, and especially our Dharma life, it's probably a particular danger if we're trying to practice a spiritual life, that we start to have an idea of what we should respond to. He said then you've got your response here, and then you're building this sort of shaky tower over here, and then it's an edifice, there's no foundations to it, it will just tumble down if you build it on an idea. So you need to see where do I respond, just in that simple way. Where do I see truth and beauty and goodness? That's very, very important. But as I say, then you don't stop with it. Once you've found that, you try. I don't really know how to explain how to do this, but I'll just try and give you a hint. You're trying to draw it out. You're then feeding that faculty with, just more and more actually nourishing things. I was going to say refined, but the trouble is everything starts having the wrong connotations. Just more and more, you just feed it, more and more so that it grows. So you were allowing ourselves more and more to respond to whatever manifests value. So you go from that ordinary responsiveness, then you start to allow yourself to respond more and more to what manifests value, unselfish people, brave people, meaningful words, beautiful images, mantra. I really felt, if you can remember back to the first night, which already seems ages ago, people, somebody said, I felt these people could be friends, some meaningful people. The sound of the mantra, I don't know why, but it just led me on. So as this faculty of responsiveness, so again, if I was going to draw, I'd be drawing a sort of curve, so here's your faculty of responsiveness down at the bottom, and you imagine it curving up, and then when that faculty meets the three jewels, it becomes Shraddha. Yeah, you see, but the important thing is just on the same continuum. That's very, very important. It's not somewhere else, Now you've got to sort of import Shraddha suddenly. Do you see how this is sort of growing out of your own responsiveness? All that's happening is your own responsiveness that you're cultivating and feeding more and more value meets the three jewels. Then it is Shraddha. Even that it becomes Shraddha, so it is Shraddha, that's what Shraddha is. But then that's not the end of the continuum. Imagine that responsiveness, Shraddha, is keeping going up, up, up. And then Vidya, wisdom, wisdom itself, even enlightenment itself. That's wonderful, isn't it? It's what I love is this continuum. As has been said already several times on this retreat, enlightenment is natural to us. It's not something we're trying to import onto ourselves. It just it comes out of that starting where we are, seeing what we're drawn to and allowing that. It's letting ourselves feel attracted It's letting the fire of our imagination be lit. This kind of attraction is positive, yeah. This is not craving, yeah, in the negative way, I think. And I'm going to give you two terms that are really, really important. And the terms are niramissa and samissa. So they're both to do with pleasure, but one is with craving and one is without craving. Literally, it's with meat and without meat, I think. So samissa is with meat and niramissa is without meat. But it means kind of fleshy, with flesh or without. But that sounds slightly moralistic, which it's not meant to be. What it means is, so samissa, that kind of, that fleshy craving, that is craving, yeah? And it's important that we learn the difference between these two, because one will just lead us to more suffering and one will lead us to more on the spiral path, yeah? So that kind of, the samissa type pleasures, they're addictive, we get to know them because they're addictive. They lead to diminishing returns, They'll never... It's that classic thing, first bit of chocolate's nice, second bit's not so nice, da-da-da. It's always diminishing, substitute for chocolate, whatever. There's diminishing returns. We become enslaved, in a certain way. Well, maybe more than a certain way. We're willing to sacrifice actual happiness in the present for our future idea of happiness. That's what addiction is, actually. So that's samissa. Niramissa is completely different. It's that wordless satisfaction, harmony, sense of rightness. There's no prapancha. There's no story going with it. It's interesting that an epithet for enlightenment is nisprapancha, no prapancha. It's less addictive. There's no hangover from it. And that is something we want to cultivate. So we want to learn to tell the difference. So maybe on this retreat, just practicing, learning to tell the difference, yeah, between these two types of pleasure. Here's another poem. Seamus Heaney. My father's ploughing. 1, 2, 3, 4 sides of the lea ground, where I sit, all seeing at centre field, my back to a thorn tree they never cut. The horses are all hoof and burnished flank. I am all foreknowledge of the poem as a ploughshare that turns time up and over. Of the chair and leaf, the fairy thorn is entering for the future, of being here for good in every sense. So I love this little poem. So I'll just sort of briefly go through it. So here's the image. So my father's ploughing. So immediately this is a child talking in the poem. The father's ploughing the field, and the child is sitting in the middle of the field with his back to a thorn tree they never cut. Now, they never cut the tree because it's the fairy tree in the middle of the field in Ireland, so it's never cut. The horses are all hoofed and burnished flank. I am all foreknowledge. Now that's mysterious. The little child that somehow becomes the poet is foreknowledge, yeah? I'm all foreknowledge. So that's interesting. It seems like the child in the poem already knows that this is a very important experience. Of the poem as a ploughshare that turns time up and over. That's interesting. I love how on these retreats the images start to join up when different ones of us are talking without planning it, because you said the Vajrayana, the ploughshare yesterday of our frustrations, ploughing the earth, yeah? So the poem is the ploughshare, turning the earth up and over, making it ready for the seeds. And then of the chair and leaf, I'll explain that because the whole poem is called Poet's Chair, which is an actual chair and leaf that sits in a certain place in Ireland. So the chair and leaf, the fairy thorn is entering for the future. So again, you've got this sense of the little child sitting, but knowing that something very important is happening that will come to flower later in the future. The fairy thorn is entering for the future of being here for good in every sense. So something that's eternal and everlasting. So does that little poem remind you of anything? The rose apple tree, isn't it? So of course in the story of the rose apple tree, it's the same story really, isn't it? The young Siddhartha is sitting by the tree, his father ritually ploughing, and just that feeling of completely at one, completely absorbed, but not absorbed in the wrong sort of way, not absorbed at the expense of being connected with all life. The young Buddha to be, he's seeing all the little insects and worms being churned up and his heart is going out for them. So he's so in touch, he's so still and quiet, but his heart is also open. And in some of the tales it said the sun didn't move in the sky. So you've got that image of timelessness. And then amazing, there's an amazing parallel with this poem actually, because of course this is what Siddhartha remembers, and this is what makes him give up the austerities. This is the instant he remembers that then means that he then sits down and once again under a tree becomes enlightened. And we've I think again we've got Bhante to thank. Bhante's genius and gift to us that he's drawn our attention to this incident. It could easily be almost missed, this incident, but Bhante really draws our attention to it. He says, how come this incident was so special, and he draws out, he brings those qualities of that relaxed attention, that relaxed attention, this incident. So this is Niramissa, I think. This is this sense of the Buddha under that tree. It would have been like just delightfully pleasurable, but in the right way, in the way that led him on, in the way that made him think, this is the way. So when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, well, maybe that might be something you wanted to think about in your groups. When have we experienced those moments? Maybe as a child, but maybe not as a child, maybe as adults. Hopefully we experience them more than once. I think there can be something about that childlike, I suppose, innocence, if that's not too hackneyed saying that. I remember the moment that comes to my mind in my life was as a child swinging on the garden swing. It was Easter, which I loved, Easter, and we'd just been to Mass and been singing these sort of glorious hymns, these glorious Easter hymns, and we'd come home from Mass and I was swinging in the garden and my mother was there in the garden too, probably, doing some chore, hanging out the washing, and it was a gloriously sunny day. So, and it just felt full of glory that day, actually, just swinging on the swing. So that comes into my mind as my rose apple tree moment. So really, you might think of when those moments have been most alive for us, and by dwelling on them and in them, is that we're trying to breathe life into them. It's quite delicate because it's not hankering after them or else that then goes wrong, but it's sort of breathing life into them, cultivating them, looking on this retreat. We can really just look for where we respond to beauty, whether that's in nature, which we're so surrounded by, and in image or story, any of the images of the stories that we're telling you, the music we're playing to you, the rituals that we'll be doing, and other people, other people. Perhaps you just see someone doing a kind gesture or something brave even, or the animals around as well. Whether it's a little mouse or just a cow or calf by itself. Sometimes things can just be infused with significance. So we can let ourselves be surprised by beauty. Yeah? I think in a way, real beauty always surprises us. That's what's so important about it. It takes us out of ourselves. That's what the word ecstasy means, apparently. It means being lifted out of ourselves. So let beauty surprise you. Be open to that. People in our group were talking about the other misty morning and all the little cobwebs and jewels on the ground, dewdrop jewels on the ground, and how it surprises you. In those moments, we forget to be a me. We forget to be a me. We step out of avidya. So avidya, if you remember, is that utilitarian attitude of what's in it for me, what can I do with this, In a moment of real beauty, we're surprised out of that. That's why it feels so good, because we've forgotten to be a me. We're touching into something that's more like vidya. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish with one more poem, another by Seamus Heaney. And when I finish that poem, we're going to have a little break. Maybe we should have a silent tea break. We'll have a silent tea break for 20 whole minutes, and there's one instruction with this tea break is do nothing at all that's useful. You can have a cup of tea and a biscuit. But if you notice, think, good, I can just, resist that. See if you can do nothing at all. And then we'll go to our groups and just see what emerges out of the groups. I've made a few suggestions, but you might have your own suggestions. So I'm going to just finish with a poem, another by Seamus Heaney in this wonderful collection, The Spirit Level, which is his own spiritual awakening, actually, in this book. And then, we'll just go straight from that into our silent tea break. Postscript. And sometime make the time to drive out west into County Clare, along the flaggy shore, in September or October, when the wind and the light are working off each other so that the ocean on one side is wild with foam and glitter, and inland among stones the surface of a slate grey lake is lit by the earth lightning of a flock of swans, their feathers ruffed and ruffling, white on white, their fully grown, headstrong-looking heads tucked or cresting or busy underwater. Useless to think you park and capture it more thoroughly. You are neither here nor there, a hurry through which known and strange things pass, as big, soft buffetings come at the car sideways and catch the heart off guard and blow it open.
We hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please help us keep this free. Make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. And thank you.